They say the truth always shows up eventually. Sometimes in words, sometimes in silence, and sometimes in the cold, glaring precision of a bank transaction. She leaned in close to my husband, laughing like she owned the room, tapping her glass, flipping her hair, calling him babe like I wasn't even there. But here's what neither of them realized. The room was mine. The restaurant was registered under my name. The staff hired by me. Every glass of overpriced champagne they flaunted was paid for by the woman they thought they were mocking. They thought I was the clueless wife. They didn't know I was the owner. And that tonight, I was serving more than dinner. I was serving consequences. You want to know what happened when I finally spoke? Buckle up. Let me tell you everything. On a quiet Friday night in October 2025, Nora Whitman sat curled up on the edge of a worn leather couch in her modest home just outside Raleigh, North Carolina, cradling a lukewarm mug of black coffee. The overhead lights were off, and only the faint golden glow from the street lamp outside seeped through the window, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The house was still, peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of stillness that usually brought comfort, but tonight it unsettled her. The Whitman home, cozy and lived in, held the memories of 24 years of marriage. Above the mantel hung their wedding photo, framed in dark walnut. In it, she and Marcus were beaming, caught in a moment of youthful promise. He, now 49, was a successful general contractor and co-owner of Whitman and Rowe Development. She, 46, a freelance financial analyst, had once managed high-stakes portfolios before deciding to work from home to raise their 2 children. Emily, now 23 and away in grad school, and Tyler, 20, who was apprenticing under his father. To outsiders, they looked like the portrait of a grounded Southern family, stable, content, successful. But as Nora stared at her phone screen, something shifted. A single charge stared back at her from the banking app. Hilton Raleigh downtown, $389, date stamped earlier that week. Her thumb hovered over the transaction that didn't make sense. Marcus had told her he'd be overseeing subcontractors at the Durham residential project all week, managing timelines, coordinating with electricians and roofers. But Raleigh was in the opposite direction. No job site, no client, no explanation that justified that charge. She blinked slowly, lips parting slightly, as if trying to breathe logic into the numbers. Maybe it was a lunch meeting, a mistake in billing. But Nora wasn't new to financial anomalies. Her instincts were honed. She'd spent decades poring over ledgers and dissecting budgets, and now that same finely tuned instinct was whispering, no, insisting that this was more than a clerical error. A cold trickle of unease slid down her spine. She set the mug down on the coffee table with a soft clink and glanced around the room. The throw blanket still draped over Marcus's favorite recliner, the framed family photos lining the hallway. Everything was in its place. Too in place, like it had been staged. Her eyes returned to her phone. She enlarged the charge. Double-checked the location, the timestamp. Hilton Raleigh downtown. That wasn't a roadside inn, it was a high-end hotel. They'd stayed there once for a birthday dinner, years ago. She remembered the marbled lobby, the cedar-scented hallways, the way Marcus had teased the valet about the price. He hadn't mentioned Raleigh. Not once. Nora exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes when you're trying not to unravel. She stood up and walked to the window, brushing aside the curtain to peer out. A car drove by, its headlights sweeping across the street. The world moved on like nothing was wrong, but something was. She reached for her laptop on the side table, opened it with practiced ease. The pale blue screen light lit up her face, catching the tight line of her jaw and the furrow between her brows. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then began typing. Passwords, account access, financial logs. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. Not the hotel charge, not the missed calls Marcus brushed off as client stuff, not the sudden need for his own workspace to concentrate. There were too many little things she'd quietly cataloged in her mind. Tonight, they all rushed forward under the quiet hum of suspicion. She clicked into their joint bank account. The screen loaded slowly. Outside, wind rustled the leaves. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. And in that moment, Nora realized something she hadn't let herself admit until now. What she'd once believed to be her safe, steady life might have cracks just beneath the surface. She stared at the numbers on the screen, each transaction blinking back at her like little confessions. She wasn't ready to confront Marcus, not yet, but she would find the truth. And once she did, there'd be no going back. The laptop's glow cast a stark light across her face, hardening what had once been softness. Nora Whitman, loyal wife, devoted mother, quiet foundation of the home, had just taken her first step into a world where she would have to become something else. Not just a woman betrayed, but a woman prepared. Nora had always believed that numbers told the truth. Clean, unforgiving, precise. It was people who twisted them, who tried to bury lies beneath invoices and spreadsheets. And tonight, the numbers whispered louder than ever. She sat at her kitchen table, hair twisted into a messy bun, sleeves shoved past her elbows. The laptop open, a legal pad next to it, filled with quick scribbles and highlighted entries. The glow of the screen illuminated the same room where she once packed school lunches, paid bills with Marcus humming across from her while scanning blueprints. Now that chair was empty, and Nora stared at their joint account with rising dread. There it was again, the hotel charge. Hilton Raleigh downtown. $389. But it was no longer the only anomaly. A deeper dive showed a pattern, a $462 flight to Orlando, then a $195 dinner at a luxury steakhouse in Raleigh, 2 days later, and then recurring payments, $2,000 every month, wired to a name she didn't recognize, Madison Clark. The name echoed in her head as she typed it into a search bar. No LinkedIn, no business registry, no social trail. Just a few mentions, some real estate records, a dated event photo from a local gala fundraiser. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Nora's skin prickle. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she landed on one she hadn't used in years. Trey Lawson, private investigator. He'd helped her once before, years ago, when a former client had tried to launder funds. Trey had a gift for seeing what others missed, for slipping through cracks and emerging with truth. She pressed the call button. Nora Whitman, his voice was rough, familiar. Been a while. I need your help again, she said quietly, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. By Monday, Trey had delivered. The envelope was thick, sealed with a red tab. Inside were the kind of answers that made your breath catch. Nora sat alone in her car, parked at the far corner of a grocery store lot, hands trembling slightly as she flipped through the photographs. Marcus and a woman, long auburn hair, a tailored navy dress hugging a visibly pregnant belly. They were walking out of a seafood restaurant, Marcus holding the door for her, his hand briefly brushing the small of her back. Her face tilted toward his mid-laugh, a kind of closeness that only time and desire could build. The timestamp, Thursday evening. He'd told Nora he was at a supplier meeting in Durham. Her chest tightened as she stared at the photo. Not just at the woman, Madison Clark, as Trey's note confirmed, but at the ease in Marcus's expression, the smug contentment like he believed nothing he did would ever catch up with him. She should have cried. 5 years ago, she probably would have. Instead, her breath evened out and her eyes narrowed. She flipped through the rest. More dinners. A walk through Lake Johnson Park. Madison stepping out of a luxury car Nora didn't recognize. One Marcus had clearly rented for her. And finally, the nail in the coffin. A blurry but legible printout of an email Trey had obtained, the ink slightly smudged near the top. Marcus's words to Madison. The condo will be ready before Christmas. Just hang on, I want this life with you. Attached to the email was an invoice, $45,000 wired from Whitman and Rowe Development to a private construction firm Nora had never heard of. The address, a high-end condo development in Raleigh's Glencrest district. 1 bedroom, open layout, skyline view. It wasn't just betrayal of the heart, it was betrayal of the business. Nora clutched the file to her chest, her breathing steady. Her mind, trained by decades of financial strategy, began shifting from emotional devastation to structural evaluation. This wasn't just about infidelity. Marcus had used company funds, their company funds, to bankroll this hidden life. If the payments continued, it could compromise their tax filings, trigger an audit, or worse, put them both in legal jeopardy. And if Whitman and Rowe fell, so would everything else. Back home, Nora laid the documents across the kitchen table. The same table where her kids had once done math homework, where Marcus used to kiss her cheek after long days on site. Now, It was a battlefield. She opened Marcus's laptop, one he often left unlocked, assuming she'd never pry. But Nora had pried before, years ago, when Emily was being harassed by a teacher and Nora had needed proof. She knew how to navigate a hard drive quietly, efficiently. Emails, dozens of them, most benign, some buried deeper. A chain between Marcus and Madison, payment plans, apartment design notes, baby names, baby names. Her stomach turned, but her fingers moved faster. She forwarded the most damning exchanges to herself, renamed the folder Q3 Reports, and closed the laptop with a soft click. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she pulled a manila folder from the cabinet and started labeling and organizing. Timeline, financials, photos. This wasn't about whether Marcus loved her. She already had that answer. This was about safeguarding what was hers, and what still belonged to Emily and Tyler. At midnight, Nora poured herself another cup of coffee, just like she had 3 nights earlier, and returned to the table. The house was quiet, but no longer calm. It was the stillness before a storm. She looked at the photos still hanging above the fireplace, not out of sentiment, but because it reminded her of what was at stake. The ache in her chest hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, honed itself into something harder than sorrow. This was no longer grief. This was clarity, and clarity had always been her sharpest edge. She told no one where she was going. Not Emily, not Tyler, especially not Marcus. She slid into her SUV beneath the gray October sky, tacked the windshield already misted with light rain. The wipers moved in steady arcs as she drove through the sleepy streets of their Carolina town. The kind of place where everyone knew your name and secrets weren't supposed to last long. But tonight, Nora wasn't worried about secrets. She was focused on protection. Hers and her children's. The drive took 30 minutes, to the outskirts, where old red brick buildings faded into wooded patches. She parked outside a narrow 2-story structure with faded green shutters and a tilted sign that read, "Manning and Croft, Attorneys at Law." She hadn't been there in 2 decades. Inside, it smelled like cedar and old dust. The waiting room hadn't changed. Antique chairs, faded rug, a grandfather clock that ticked too loud for comfort. The secretary looked up, recognized her, and nodded softly before disappearing into the back. Moments later, Richard Manning appeared, older, grayer, but with the same calm steadiness she remembered from her father's estate settlement. "Nora," he said warmly, extending a hand. "It's been a long time." She shook it. "Too long." They walked into his office, wood-paneled walls, a green glass desk lamp glowing warmly. Rain tapped against the high windows. Nora sat down, exhaled, and set the leather folder on the desk. "I'm not sure where to begin." She admitted it. Richard studied her for a moment before opening a drawer and pulling out a thick file. "Then let me start. You're here because something's changed, and I suspect it's your marriage." Nora gave a small, tight nod. "I need to know what my rights are. Not just emotionally. Legally." Richard opened the file and pulled out a copy of the Whitman marriage certificate. According to North Carolina law, this is a community property state. That means anything acquired during the marriage, homes, accounts, businesses, is considered jointly owned. Whitman and Road Development? You're entitled to half. Nora's breath caught. She'd suspected it, but hearing it confirmed sparked something deep inside her. "I want to protect myself. My kids," she said. "Then you'll need to move smart and fast," Richard replied. "Do you have documentation of misuse? Anything that could support financial misconduct?" She reached into her folder and pulled out the photos Trey had delivered. The email with the condo details, the $45,000 wire from the company account. Richard raised an eyebrow as he skimmed through the papers. "This isn't just infidelity. It's potential fraud. And if we can connect company funds to personal expenses unrelated to operations, both the courts and the IRS will take interest." Nora swallowed. "So what do I do next?" He slid a blank yellow legal pad toward her. "Start by freezing access. If your joint accounts are still open, he could clean them out the moment he senses something is wrong." "I already called the bank," she said. "I'm just waiting on confirmation." Richard gave a small nod of approval. "Good. And Nora, start documenting everything. Every charge, every email, every receipt. Paper is power. If Marcus gets ahead of this, he'll try to paint you as emotional or reactive. We need to make sure you stay proactive." She nodded slowly, but something in her chest twisted. It was the first time she had spoken these fears out loud, and with every word came a wave of grief for the life she once thought she had. For years she'd convinced herself that being quiet meant being strong, that if she just endured long enough, things would right themselves. She wasn't naive. She was just tired of starting wars she thought she couldn't win. Now, there was no turning back. But admitting she needed protection felt like shedding armor she had worn so long it had become skin. She stepped out of the office into heavier rain, the file of documents tucked beneath her arm like armor. Inside the car, she dialed the bank and waited on hold. Raindrops streaked down the windshield like tears she no longer had the strength to cry. "Mrs. Whitman," the representative finally said, "your request to freeze the joint account has been processed. As of now, neither party can make withdrawals without dual authorization." Nora exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as she ended the call. But her voice, when she whispered "thank you," was firm. The drive home blurred under the soft percussion of rain, streetlights reflected on wet pavement in golden ribbons. She turned onto their quiet cul-de-sac, past manicured hedges and Halloween decorations, and into her driveway. The house was dark. Marcus still hadn't returned. She moved quietly, bypassing the living room and heading straight for the office she'd once used to manage client portfolios. Tonight, it became her war room. She sat at the desk, flipping open Marcus's files, checking emails again, compiling everything. Lease agreements, receipts from the Glencrest condo development, emails discussing a new beginning. A recurring line echoed in his messages to Madison: "We just need a little more time." She knew exactly what that meant. He was stalling, hoping she wouldn't find anything until it was too late. But he'd underestimated her. She labeled folders: asset misuse, real estate transactions, communication. Then printed a fresh copy of their latest tax filings. Her eyes scanned for inconsistencies, underreported income, anything Richard could use to prove fraud. In the quiet, her phone buzzed. A message from Tyler. "Dad said he'll be home late again. Should I heat up the chili?" She replied, "No need, honey. Get some rest. I love you." Then she set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming what had been slowly, quietly taken from her for years under the disguise of trust. And it started now. Later that night, in the bedroom she and Marcus had once shared, Nora sat at the edge of the bed. The sheets on his side were still tucked in tight. No scent of cologne, no familiar dip in the mattress. She didn't miss him. Not anymore. She looked at the empty space beside her, then at the rain-streaked window. The world outside was still, but inside her, motion, direction, resolve. "You won't see it coming, Marcus," she whispered into the dark, her voice steady and low. And she meant every word. The decision came to Nora as clearly as the first rays of morning light. She would not confront Marcus in silence, not in private, and certainly not in shame. After 24 years of building a life together, raising 2 children, managing finances, hosting holidays, swallowing doubt, he had earned something more fitting. He had earned a stage, and she would give it to him. The 25th anniversary party had been discussed weeks earlier, back when life still wore the mask of normalcy. Marcus had floated the idea casually. "Let's book that bistro downtown. Invite family, maybe a few clients. Make it a night to remember." She'd smiled and agreed, quietly swallowing the discomfort already taking root in her gut. Now it would be a night to remember, just not in the way he imagined. Nora sat in her home office, the soft amber light of her desk lamp casting shadows over the stack of documents beside her. Color photos of Marcus and Madison, receipts from lavish dinners, emails about the Glencrest condo, and that damning $45,000 wire from Whitman and Rowe. Each page felt like another illusion peeled back. She had laid the groundwork. Now it was time to invite the audience. The venue was the Pecan Row, a sleek, upscale restaurant in the heart of their North Carolina town, with wide glass windows overlooking the main street, currently dotted with fall garlands and softly glowing string lights. Nora had reserved a private dining room on the second floor, seating for 20. She hand-wrote the invitations herself, elegant cream cardstock with subtle gold embossing, addressed to Marcus's closest business associates, their family, and most importantly, his mother, Della, and their children, Emily and Tyler. She made sure to include Blake Rennert on the list. Blake had been Marcus's collaborator on multiple projects, including the questionable Charleston Heights development. Nora wasn't sure where his loyalties lay, but his presence would serve a purpose either way. That afternoon, Nora called the bank again. "Yes, ma'am," the teller confirmed politely. "The joint account remains frozen. Mr. Whitman attempted a withdrawal this morning, but we followed your instructions." Nora closed her eyes, briefly absorbing the moment, not with celebration, but with calm resolve. "Thank you," she said evenly, before ending the call. She stood, walked to the window, and watched the wind sweep golden leaves across the driveway. There was a quiet satisfaction blooming beneath her ribs, not joy, not vengeance, but purpose. For the first time in weeks, she felt fully in control. Across town, Marcus was oblivious. That evening, he called her from the road, upbeat. "Hey, I went ahead and confirmed the champagne order with the pecan roe. I had them add that lobster biscuit to the menu. It's going to be beautiful, Nora. A real celebration." He chuckled. "Can't wait to see your face." Nora held the phone steady, her tone warm but unreadable. "Thank you, Marcus. I'm looking forward to it." He kept talking, rambling about how the night would impress everyone. "The team needs to see we're still solid, still the foundation," he said, unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to crack. Later that night, her phone lit up again. "Hey, Mom," Emily said, her voice soft but curious. "You okay? You sounded different when we talked earlier." "Just tired," Nora replied, hesitating a beat, then smiling even though Emily couldn't see it. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I've just had a lot on my mind lately. But come to the party. It's going to be a night none of us will forget." Emily chuckled gently. "You're being mysterious? Should I be nervous?" Nora laughed lightly. "You'll see." When the call ended, she sat in the quiet, letting the weight of it all settle. She hadn't told the kids. Not yet. Not because they couldn't handle it, but because they deserved the full truth. Not whispered suspicions or tense conversations behind closed doors. The truth would come when it needed to, and they would see it for themselves. She walked into her bedroom, where light from the adjacent bathroom cast a soft halo over the floor. The room smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen. She opened her closet and reached for the dress, a sleek black sheath with a modest neckline, classic and timeless. She'd bought it months ago on a whim, thinking she'd never find the right occasion to wear it. Now she had. Her fingers paused at the fabric, brushing it gently as though seeking strength from its smooth surface. The ache inside her wasn't loud, it was low and settled, like the final drop of a weight that had hung above her for years. This wasn't just a dress, it was her declaration. That she had seen the worst and had chosen to rise, not rage. That tonight would not be a confrontation in chaos, but a reckoning built on truth. She slipped it off the hanger and laid it gently across the bed. Her eyes flicked to the mirror. She walked toward it. The woman staring back was no longer the same. Gone was the wife who smiled blindly through years of subtle neglect. Gone was the woman who shrank beneath doubt. What stared back now was someone composed, deliberate, a woman stepping into a role she never asked for, but would now command. Nora gathered her hair and smoothed it back, her fingers moving with calm precision. As she looked into her own eyes, she whispered to the reflection, a vow made not from bitterness, but from truth. Tonight changes everything. The pecan roe was bathed in golden light that evening. Each chandelier above the white linen tables sparkled like a constellation suspended in celebration. The dining room, framed by tall windows that overlooked the softly lit street, exuded the kind of elegance people reserved for milestones. The scent of rosemary chicken wafted in from the kitchen. The soft clink of silverware, the hush of conversation. By all appearances, it was a perfect evening. Marcus Whitman stood near the head of the long table, gray suit pressed, hair slicked with precision, his charm carefully tuned for the crowd. His voice rose above the murmur, a glass of champagne in hand. "To 25 years," he declared, beaming, "with the woman who stood by me through it all. The love of my life, the heart of our family, and the best damn partner anyone could ask for." Laughter, a few cheers. Nora smiled from her seat beside him, her black dress sleek and simple, pearls resting just below her collarbone. She looked composed, radiant even, but her fingers curled tightly around the base of her wineglass. Her heart thudded slow and steady, every beat synchronized with the countdown in her mind. Marcus reached over and touched her hand. The gesture, practiced. To Nora, he added, and to many more years to come. The room echoed with polite applause. Blake Rennert raised his glass with the slightest hesitation. Della dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin. Emily leaned toward Tyler, whispering something that made him tilt his head in mild confusion. Then Nora stood. Her chair scraped gently against the floor. The only sound that didn't belong. All eyes turned to her as she placed her napkin neatly beside her plate and stepped forward. Her expression was composed. She smiled, but it wasn't soft or grateful. It was precise. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, voice clear and measured. "And thank you all for being here tonight. 25 years. It's a long time, a lifetime really, and I thought tonight would be the perfect moment to share something meaningful." She reached for the leather folder she had slipped under her chair earlier and set it carefully on the table. The murmurs quieted. Marcus's brow furrowed slightly, but his smile stayed in place. "This isn't just a celebration," Nora continued, flipping open the folder with a slow, deliberate motion. "It's also a turning point. Because tonight isn't just about looking back. It's about reclaiming what's mine." She pulled out the first photo and slid it across the table toward Marcus. In it, he and Madison Clark stood outside a Raleigh seafood restaurant, her hand resting on his arm, her belly rounded beneath a silk dress. A second photo followed, Marcus and Madison exiting a condo leasing office. Then came the receipts. A $45,000 wire from Whitman and Rowe Development to a private construction firm, luxury dining bills, plane tickets to Florida. Gasps rippled down the table. Della lowered her glass mid-sip. Emily's face went pale. Marcus's eyes darted between the images, then to Nora. "Nora, what the hell is this?" She didn't flinch. "It's documentation of where our company's money has been going, of where you've been going, and of who you've been going with." Blake Rennert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hand settling near the edge of his plate, but he didn't look up. "And just to be clear," Nora continued, her voice sharpening, "I've already requested a forensic audit of Whitman and Rowe, because I suspect there's more than just a few romantic dinners buried in the books. We may be looking at tax fraud, Marcus, and you know how the IRS handles surprises." Marcus flushed red. "You're twisting this. It's business-related, that property. It was a client deal, a potential. A condo in Madison Clark's name?" Nora cut in, calm but direct. "Attached to emails about a new life? Come on, Marcus, did you really think I wouldn't find out?" The air turned dense, brittle. Emily leaned toward Tyler and whispered, "Is this real? Serious?" Tyler nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off his father. Marcus's voice cracked. "She's exaggerating. She's jealous, emotional. This is just a misunderstanding. Everyone knows how dramatic Nora can get when she feels cornered." There it was, his defense, dismissal, deflection. Nora met his gaze, unblinking. "No, Marcus, this isn't emotion. This is evidence." Blake cleared his throat and looked away. Della stared down at her plate, hands clenched tightly in her lap. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. Marcus tried again, louder. "You're destroying our family over a few emails." Nora turned to the room, addressing them now. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing what's already been broken, and if justice has anything to say about it, it'll be the one to decide what happens next." Then she closed the folder. Her movements slow, dignified. Marcus stood frozen, breathing hard, sweat forming at his temples. Without another word, he slammed his champagne glass onto the table. It tipped and shattered, shards scattering across the white linen. He turned and walked out, shoulders stiff. The stunned silence of the room followed him. No one moved at first. Then Emily stood. Her voice trembled. "Mom, did you know this whole time?" Nora looked at her daughter and nodded softly. "Long enough." Tyler pulled out his phone, eyes averted. Della reached for her wine glass with a shaky hand. Nora sat back down. Her fingers rested firmly on the edge of her chair, her posture still, though her body trembled faintly, not from fear, but from the weight of release. Above her the chandelier sparkled as it had before, but now it seemed colder, harsher. The lights no longer celebrated love. They marked survival. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease from her shoulders. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "It begins now." The door slammed shut behind Marcus with a force that rattled the framed degrees on the dark paneled walls of the law office. Rain lashed against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the sky mirrored his rage. He stormed into the room like a living storm, face flushed, fists clenched. "She's making it all up," he barked. "This is defamation, Paul. I want her stopped." Paul Grayson, gray-haired and perpetually unbothered, barely looked up from his notepad. The mahogany desk between them felt more like a bench in court than a lawyer's workspace. "Defamation requires falsity," Paul said, his voice calm. "Were the documents she showed at the party fabricated?" Marcus's jaw locked. He looked away. She twisted everything. She's weaponizing family drama, personal stuff. I built Whitman and Rowe from nothing. I should have control. She's trying to tear it all down out of spite." Paul set his pen down. "You're not just talking about saving the company, Marcus. You're trying to salvage your name. That's a different strategy. If you want to claim defamation, we need proof she knowingly lied. Do you have that?" Marcus slammed his hand against the desk. "No. But she has no right. She's not a builder. She never laid a brick, never stepped onto a job site." "But she's your wife," Paul replied flatly, "and under North Carolina law, that gives her rights to every brick you laid during the marriage. You can scream and threaten all you want, but the courts won't care about your ego. They'll care about the books, and if that audit she mentioned holds up." "I want her discredited," Marcus snapped. "Find something. Anything." Paul raised an eyebrow. "That's not how this works." Frustrated, Marcus shoved back his chair and stormed out without another word. His phone was already in his hand as he stepped onto the rainy street, dialing the only person he still believed might be on his side. "Mama," he said, as soon as Della answered. "I need you." He said it as soon as Della answered. "I need you." Less than an hour later, they were standing in the soft light of Nora's living room. Della sat in the high-backed armchair by the fireplace, her silver hair pinned neatly, her posture dignified but clearly tired. The floral teacup in her hand trembled slightly as Marcus paced the rug like a man on trial, which, in many ways, he was. "She's tearing this family apart," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "She ambushed me in front of everyone. Clients, friends, our kids. Mom, you have to talk to her. Get her to stop, please." Nora stood near the doorway, arms crossed, not interrupting. Her gaze stayed steady, on Della, not Marcus. But inside, a different tension simmered. She had stood in front of this woman for years, biting back thoughts, smoothing over tension, trying to be enough. The dutiful daughter-in-law, the peacemaker. How many times had she second-guessed herself after a passive remark or quiet glance from Della? And now here they were, truth spread out between them, no performance left. Her pulse beat steady, but her stomach clenched. She wasn't sure if Della would finally see her or turn away, like before. Della didn't respond right away. She simply sipped her tea, watching her son with unreadable eyes. The silence stretched long enough to make Marcus shift. "Mama? I remember asking you about the company's finances 5 years ago," Della finally said, her voice low. "You told me it was none of my concern, that you had everything under control. I wanted to believe you. I truly did." Marcus blinked. "What does that have to do with this?" Nora stepped forward quietly and set a folder on the coffee table. She opened it without a word, revealing the same documents from the party, now paired with spreadsheets and timelines. The receipts were highlighted, the emails printed in full. Della set her cup down. "I knew you were hiding something," she said, "but I thought it was just pride, not this." Marcus turned to her, desperation creeping into his voice. "You're taking her side?" "She's not perfect," Della said slowly. "But she's not a liar either. And your father." She paused, reaching into her handbag. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out a small, worn envelope, its edges yellowed with time. She passed it to Nora. "This was meant for you," Della said softly. "Your father set it aside in his estate, a private trust. He asked me to give it to you on your 5th anniversary. I didn't. I let Marcus convince me it was better for the business if everything stayed under his name." Nora unfolded the papers inside. A trust signed and notarized 20 years ago, assigning her a 15% ownership stake in the company, independent of her marriage, granted as a gift from Marcus's father. Marcus went white. "You knew?" he whispered to his mother. "I suspected, but you kept things so tightly controlled. Even I couldn't get answers." and now I see why." Nora looked at Della, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." "I should have done it sooner," Della replied, placing a gentle hand on Nora's arm. "But I'm doing it now." For a fleeting second, something fragile stirred in Nora's chest. Not forgiveness, but release. After years of waiting to be seen, she finally was. Not as Marcus's wife, not as a problem to manage, but as a woman who had held together a life built on someone else's terms. Her throat tightened, but she blinked the feeling back. This wasn't the moment to cry. It was the moment to breathe. Marcus stepped back, breath shallow, eyes flicking between the two women like the walls were closing in. He turned abruptly and left. His footsteps echoed in the silent hallway. Outside, he gripped the steering wheel of his car, knuckles pale. Rain fell in sheets across the windshield. He sat there, jaw clenched, breathing hard, unmoving. Nora watched from the window, the glow of a nearby lamp casting a soft aura behind her. Behind her, Della quietly sipped her tea once more. "He never saw it coming," Nora said softly, almost to herself. "No," Della murmured. "Men like him rarely do." The lights in the living room dimmed as the hour grew late, shadows lengthening across the walls. But in Nora's chest, something steady and bright had begun to burn. The war was far from over, but tonight she had won a battle Marcus never even knew he was fighting. 2 days after the anniversary party, Nora stood outside the courthouse, coat drawn tightly around her shoulders as the early November wind swept through downtown Raleigh. The sky above was a pale, unmoving gray. Neither storm nor sun, just the kind of muted heaviness that mirrored what she was about to do. In her hand was the manila envelope that carried the first true strike in a war Marcus never thought she'd start. She stepped inside. Her heels clicked with quiet certainty against the marble floor as she approached the clerk's desk with calm resolve. "I'm here to file for divorce," she said, sliding the envelope forward, "and to request an independent tax audit of Whitman and Road Development." The clerk blinked, then nodded, taking the papers. It was done. It was a threat, legal, cold, and dressed in official letterhead, but a threat nonetheless. She dropped the letter onto the counter, her chest rising slowly. He was fighting back. She'd expected it. What she hadn't expected came hours later. An email notification pinged on her phone, from Blake Rennert. Subject line, regarding Marcus. There were no pleasantries, just one line. "I can't be part of this anymore. It's getting ugly, and I don't want to go down with him." Attached were PDFs of contracts. One in particular stood out, an interior design consulting agreement for the new condo project. $15,000. The consultant's name? Madison Clark. Nora stared at the screen, the weight of confirmation settling over her like steel. She scrolled further. Another attachment, a scanned email from Marcus instructing Blake to make sure the invoices look clean. "Don't list Madison's name directly. I'll handle it." She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. A slow, heavy burn curled beneath her ribs, not rage, not even vindication, but the ache of finality. Some quiet part of her had clung to the smallest hope that this wasn't what it looked like. That maybe she had overread, overfeared, overreacted. But this was absolute. It was the kind of truth that didn't need explaining. There it was. Concrete evidence. Not only was Marcus using company funds to support Madison, he was actively covering it up. Nora knew exactly how this would play in court. But even more, she knew how it would play in the court of public opinion. The next morning, the whispers started. A local news blog posted a short article, "Prominent developer under scrutiny for suspicious spending." No names were mentioned yet, but anyone paying attention could read between the lines. Within hours, her phone buzzed again, this time from a reporter at the Raleigh Ledger, requesting comment. Nora declined. But the damage was spreading. That evening, she stood alone in the kitchen, rain tapping gently against the windows like a persistent whisper. The house felt emptier than usual. Emily still at school. Tyler on a late shift, probably with friends. Marcus wouldn't trust after this. Nora leaned against the counter, a lukewarm mug of coffee cupped between her hands. The light above the sink flickered. Through the window, the streetlights painted long shadows on the rain-slick pavement. She stared at them, her thoughts spinning, but steady. "He did this to himself," she whispered, more to the silence than anyone else. "You dug your own grave, Marcus." The war had moved beyond emotion. It was now about evidence. This wasn't just betrayal. It was accountability. Her phone rang, startling her. It was Emily. She answered, trying to sound calm. "Mom?" Her daughter's voice was tight, concerned. "I just saw something online. Is everything okay? What's going on with Dad's company?" Nora closed her eyes for a beat, then spoke, carefully, calmly. "We'll talk soon, sweetheart, but I need you to trust me for now. I'm protecting us. That's all I can say." "Is this why you've been different lately?" Nora's heart clenched. "Yes." Emily was quiet on the other end. Then softly, "Okay. Just don't shut me out, please." "I won't," Nora said. "I promise." After hanging up, she placed the phone down and turned back toward the kitchen table, where the folder from Richard still sat open. Contracts, ledgers, printed screenshots. It was all there. The evidence of how far things had fallen, and the map of how she would rise. She sat down, turned to a fresh page in her notebook, and began outlining her next move, not with vengeance, but with clarity. This wasn't just about reclaiming her power. It was about rewriting the rules of the life Marcus once tried to control. The paper war had begun, and Nora Whitman was not going to lose. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust, its beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights offering no comfort. Just the sterile stillness of truth about to be dissected. Nora sat at a long wooden bench, hands folded tightly in her lap, the stack of documents beside her like a quiet arsenal. She heard the soft rustle of papers, low murmurs in the gallery, the occasional squeak of leather chairs as attorneys shifted. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was a stage. And today, the spotlight was on Marcus. Across the aisle, he sat beside Paul Grayson, his lawyer. He wore a sharply tailored navy suit, but it couldn't mask the deepening lines around his eyes. His posture, once proud, now seemed forced. Held up more by habit than strength, he wouldn't meet Nora's gaze. He adjusted his cufflink, again and again, as if it could distract from the storm forming around him. "All rise." Everyone stood as the judge entered, an older woman with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her black robe swished as she took her seat. The trial began with formalities, names, titles, allegiances. Nora barely heard them. Her focus was locked on what she had to do. Richard Manning rose as Nora's attorney. He addressed the court with measured calm. "Your Honor, we are presenting documented financial fraud within Whitman and Rowe Development committed by Mr. Marcus Whitman, including but not limited to misappropriation of funds, falsified contracts, and use of company assets for extramarital purposes." Paul immediately objected, calling the claims unsubstantiated, but the judge cut him off. "Let's see the evidence," she said crisply. Richard began, methodically, deliberately. He started with the inflated contract from the Charleston Heights project. Then came the trail. Receipts, wire transfers, hotel invoices, lavish dinners. Each exhibit was handed to the judge, who examined them with that special brand of professional disinterest that made each page feel heavier. Then came the emails. "Exhibit G," Richard said, handing over a printout. An internal email from Mr. Whitman to Mr. Blake Rennert, requesting that Miss Madison Clark's name be omitted from company invoices. Quoting directly, "Make sure the invoices look clean. Don't list Madison's name directly." "I'll handle it." Marcus shifted in his seat. "Mr. Whitman," the judge said, "do you dispute this email?" Paul leaned in to whisper, but Marcus waved him off. "I don't recall writing that," he said aloud, "and even if I did, it was probably taken out of context." Nora's jaw clenched. The arrogance in Marcus's voice hadn't dulled. It had simply become more desperate. Richard called Nora to the stand. Her heels echoed softly as she walked the aisle, swore her oath, and sat. She took a steadying breath, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Mrs. Whitman," Richard began, "can you explain when you first became suspicious of financial irregularities in your husband's company?" Nora nodded. "October 17th, I saw a hotel charge in Raleigh that didn't match Marcus's schedule. He told me he was in Durham. That led me to check our joint account. From there, I saw other transactions, flights, dining, a $2,000 monthly transfer to someone named Madison Clark. So I started digging." She recounted each step, hiring Trey Lawson, receiving the photographs, pulling emails from their home computer. She didn't rush. She told it as it had happened, piece by piece, betrayal by betrayal. The courtroom hung on every word. When Richard asked what her goal was in filing the audit request, she answered clearly, "I wasn't trying to ruin him. I wanted the truth, and I wanted to make sure my children didn't lose their future because of his choices. Paul rose for cross-examination. You claim you weren't trying to ruin him, he said, voice slick. But you exposed him publicly at a party. You froze joint accounts. You filed for divorce. You initiated a financial investigation. Isn't this personal? Nora didn't flinch. It was personal when he betrayed me. It became legal when he involved the company. Whispers moved through the gallery like dry leaves in the wind. Paul narrowed his eyes. You accessed his email without permission. That's a violation of privacy, isn't it? It was our home computer, she replied calmly. No password. And under North Carolina law, I'm entitled to access information relevant to our marital property. His business is part of that. The judge nodded slightly, noting the point. Then came the moment Richard had prepared her for. The witness who could seal everything. Your Honor, he said, we'd like to call Ms. Madison Clark to the stand. There was a visible shift in the room. Madison walked in slowly, her frame thinner than in the photos Nora had seen. Her stomach was just barely rounded beneath a dark dress. She didn't look at Marcus as she took the oath and sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her gaze dropped when questioned. Miss Clark, Richard said gently, how long have you known Mr. Whitman? About 9 months, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Did he ever make promises to you regarding his marriage? Madison hesitated, then nodded. He told me he was separating, that he was building a future for us. He said once the business stabilized, he'd file for divorce. Marcus shook his head, muttering lies under his breath. And the condo you're living in? It's in my name, but he paid for it through the company. I didn't know it was illegal. I didn't want trouble. Did you receive any funds labeled as interior consulting fees? Madison hesitated again, then gave a slight nod. He said it would help. Keep things quiet. Paul jumped to his feet, furious. Objection. Irrelevant. Speculative. Overruled, the judge said firmly. Nora didn't gloat, she didn't smile. She just sat, spine straight, heart heavy but clear. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. The judge called for a brief recess. When court resumed that afternoon, she returned with her preliminary ruling. This court finds sufficient cause to grant Mrs. Whitman 60% of all marital assets, including majority interest in Whitman and Rowe development. Mr. Whitman is liable for repayment of improperly used funds totaling $75,000, pending further IRS review. This court does not take lightly the misuse of business funds and will be forwarding this case to the appropriate tax authorities. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Marcus's face turned pale. He slumped slightly in his chair. As everyone stood to exit, a photographer stationed outside raised his camera. A loud click echoed through the marble hallway, capturing Marcus mid-stride, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. The next day, that photo ran on the front page of the Raleigh Ledger beneath the headline, "Respected developer faces collapse amid financial scandal." Nora stood just outside the building. Emily and Tyler waited beside her. The wind tugged gently at her coat. Tyler held the door open, and Emily looked up at her, pride and 1,000 questions dancing in her eyes. "You okay?" Emily asked softly. Nora nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." But inside she felt the ripple of what was still to come. This wasn't over. Not yet. The fallout was just beginning, and Marcus Whitman had only begun to realize what he had truly lost. The wind carried the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. The front porch light flickered slightly as Nora opened the door, to a man she barely recognized. Marcus stood there, shoulders hunched beneath a wrinkled coat, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The man who once strode through job sites with command now looked like a shell, fragile, hollowed out. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, hands trembling slightly at his sides. Then suddenly he dropped to his knees on the porch, the gravel crunching beneath him. Nora remained in the doorway, one hand on the frame. The soft amber light from the living room cast a long shadow behind her. "Nora," Marcus rasped, his voice barely audible. "I was wrong. I've been wrong about everything. Please. Not for me. Do it for the kids, for Emily, for Tyler. Give me one more chance." His words didn't stir anything in her. No rage, no pity. Just a bone-deep clarity that had taken root over months of betrayal, revelations, and survival. She looked at him for what felt like minutes. The same man she had built a life with. The same man who had torn that life apart, now begging for mercy on a doorstep she had already crossed into independence. Behind her, the muffled sound of movement came from the garage. Emily and Tyler were boxing up the last of Marcus's belongings, old tools, a set of golf clubs, a jacket he hadn't worn in years. Their laughter used to fill these halls. Now it was silence that felt like truth. Nora's voice was calm, even. "The kids have already made their choice, Marcus, and so did you, over and over." Marcus's face twisted, not in anger, but something deeper. Regret tangled with disbelief. He looked like a man finally realizing the depth of his fall. Inside the garage, Tyler grabbed a dust-covered duffel bag and texted his sister without looking up. "I don't ever want to see him again." Emily glanced at her phone, her lips pressing into a thin line, then turned and walked inside. Her brother followed. Neither of them looked toward the front door. They entered the living room quietly, placing Marcus's last few boxes by the door. Then they walked over to their mother. Emily wrapped her arms around Nora first. Tyler followed, his embrace firm and protective. Nora held them both, and for a moment, time slowed. Their warmth grounded her, like roots and soil finally cleared of rot. Out on the porch, Marcus lowered his head. "You win," he croaked. "Happy now?" But Nora knew this wasn't a win. This was survival. This was boundaries. This was the moment the past stopped holding power. Her voice, though soft, cut like frost. "It was never about winning, Marcus. It was about finally stopping the bleeding." He looked up at her one last time, eyes hollow, searching for a crack in her resolve. There was none. After 24 years of compromise, of quiet endurance, Nora had nothing left to offer him. She stepped back and closed the door, not with spite, but with the kind of peace that comes from knowing no apology could ever patch what had been broken for so long. She leaned her back against the door, exhaled slowly, and let her body slide down until she was sitting on the floor. In that stillness, grief settled in, not sharp and screaming, but slow and heavy. She wasn't mourning Marcus anymore. She was mourning the version of herself who believed silence kept peace, who thought loyalty could fix what love alone couldn't. She remembered birthdays where he forgot the candles, anniversaries brushed off for meetings, the time he left during her flu to attend a dinner with investors. Small betrayals, disguised as priorities. And still, she'd waited, for things to change, for him to notice, for the tide to turn. It never did. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the quiet collapse of a version of herself she no longer needed to protect. No performance, no explaining. Just the release that comes when a chapter ends without needing anyone else's permission. For the first time in months, she let the tears come. They weren't violent sobs or anguished cries. They were quiet, steady tears that streamed down her cheeks in silence. Tears for the woman she used to be, for the pain she had carried alone, and for the family that was now irreversibly changed. In the background, the garage door clicked shut. Emily peeked around the hallway, watching her mother. For a moment, without a word, she brought over a soft blanket, draped it around Nora's shoulders, and sat beside her. Tyler followed, sitting on the other side. The three of them didn't speak. They just stayed like that, shoulder to shoulder, anchored in shared grief, but also in each other. Outside, the cold thickened as fog rolled in. Marcus eventually stood. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he stumbled to his car. The engine coughed to life, then settled into a low hum. His taillights cast a fading red glow as the car pulled away, swallowed by the misty Carolina night. Nora didn't rise to watch him go. She didn't need to. That chapter had closed, not with fury, but with truth. Inside the warmth of the house, the faint ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds, and yet it felt more alive than it had in years. Nora looked toward her children and whispered, almost to herself, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. Marcus sat alone in a dim, peeling one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. His world stripped down to bare walls and unpaid bills. The once proud man who built homes now couldn't afford one of his own. The silence was thick, broken only by the flicker of the TV and the occasional siren outside. He reached for his phone and dialed Madison. Voicemail. He called again. Still nothing. In a modest apartment in Raleigh, Madison rocked their baby gently against her shoulder. When her phone buzzed, she looked at the screen, let it ring out, and whispered to her son, "We don't need him." Back in her new office, Nora sat with Tyler and Emily, finalizing the relaunch of Whitman & Rowe under a new name, Whitman Living. The logo was modern, the tone fresh, and the mission rooted in the values Marcus had long abandoned. With Tyler by her side as her assistant and Emily helping part-time from school, the company had found new life. When Nora signed her first post-divorce contract, her hands trembled slightly. Tyler noticed and smiled. "You did it, Mom." That same week, a local newspaper ran a story. Disgraced developer declares bankruptcy. Final property sold to cover back taxes. Marcus's name, once associated with luxury homes, now sat beneath a headline of failure. Twist 7 landed with a thud. There was nothing left. As Nora looked out the office window at the town glowing with early Christmas lights, she felt no triumph, only a quiet release. Closure. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Marcus sat on a stained couch, holding an old photo of their family. The faces smiled at him from another life, one that had slipped through his fingers. Nora stood at her desk in Whitman Living, sunlight pouring in from tall windows behind her. Outside, the town was dusted in frost, preparing for the holidays. But inside, her world was alive again. Papers rustled, phones rang. Laughter from the hallway made the space feel full. Emily, home for winter break, stood across from her mother holding a folder. "I've been thinking," she said, opening it. "Let's start a scholarship for women like you, like us. Call it Whitman Future. No one should feel stuck like you did." Nora looked at her daughter, then down at the form. She signed it with a steady hand. "This is ours now. All of it. The future, too." Tyler popped in moments later, dropping a fresh client file on Nora's desk. "We're booked through February," he grinned. "Feels good, huh?" She nodded, her heart full. This company's going to be different. Then came a call. A familiar name flashed on the screen, one of Marcus's former clients. "Would you be willing to finish what he couldn't?" the voice asked, cautious. Nora's reply was simple, clear. "We operate with integrity now. That means we start fresh, no shortcuts." When she hung up, she glanced around her new office. The warmth in her chest matched only by the glow of the desk lamp beside her. She picked up her pen and opened her planner to the first page of the new year. For a moment she paused, pen hovering just above the paper. In the stillness, memory flickered. The first time she sat at a desk like this was decades ago, fresh out of college, full of ambition but tethered to Marcus's shadow. Back then, every decision was filtered through compromise. Now, the only voice in the room was hers. For the first time in decades, she was writing her future on her own terms. No shadows, no secrets, just light. Marcus Whitman sat slouched on a second-hand couch in his dim, cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. The flicker of the television cast long shadows across a dusty shoebox on the coffee table, filled with old family photos. Images that once defined him as a husband, a father, a provider. Now, they were relics of a life he could no longer claim. The local paper had done its job. Disgraced developer declares bankruptcy after tax fraud scandal. The article detailed every fall from grace, how Marcus sold his last property to cover the $75,000 in tax debt, how he lost his business, his home, his name. Alone with nothing but old furniture and silence, he picked up the phone to call Madison. It rang, then went to voicemail, again and again. In Raleigh, Madison stood at her apartment window, holding her infant close. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She didn't flinch. Instead, she rocked her baby gently and whispered, "We don't need him, baby. We never did." A new twist emerged in a follow-up report. A former colleague revealed that Marcus once bragged at a bar, "Nora will never figure it out." His arrogance, now public knowledge, became the final nail in his coffin. Meanwhile, across town, Nora was being recognized, not just as a businesswoman, but as a survivor, a pillar, the woman who rose from betrayal to rebuild her life and legacy. At home, Emily and Tyler arrived with a tin of Whitman family cookies. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the room. Nora smiled as they laughed over Christmas plans. The weight of the past had been replaced by warmth and belonging. She looked around and realized something powerful. Her family had survived, not in spite of the truth, but because of it. As Marcus turned off the TV, darkness swallowed his room. A single streetlight flickered through the blinds, pale and distant. It was no match for the soft golden glow inside Nora's home. 1 year later. Thanksgiving, 2026. Nora Whitman stood at the window of her office at Whitman Living, cradling a glass of red wine, where once she'd clung to late-night coffee. Outside, the town shimmered in early Christmas lights, a misty glow wrapping buildings like a warm memory. Emily and Tyler burst in, arms full of laughter and a box of homemade cookies. Nora's twist on the family recipe, passed down from Della. "We're stronger than ever, huh, Mom?" Emily grinned. Nora pulled them into a hug, her heart full. "We are. We really are." Then Emily handed her an envelope that had arrived earlier that week. It was addressed in Della's handwriting. Nora opened it slowly, her breath catching at the familiar script. "Nora, thank you for protecting what matters. I wish I'd seen Marcus's truth sooner. You have honored this family more than anyone ever has. I'm proud of you." The handwriting blurred through her tears, not from sadness, but from the quiet grace of finally being seen, not as someone who survived, but as someone who chose to rise. In the background, a small news segment played softly on the TV. Marcus Whitman had been denied yet another labor job due to his criminal record. His name, once respected, now barely drew notice. Just another cautionary tale. Nora didn't smile at his fall. She smiled because she no longer lived in his shadow. As she turned off the office light and joined her children on the street, the glow of Thanksgiving lights bathed their faces. Nora walked forward, not just as someone who had survived, but as someone who had triumphed. Her journey, once marred by betrayal, now shimmered with clarity, purpose, and peace. Sometimes the most profound journeys begin not with a loud declaration, but with a quiet moment of truth. When the light finally breaks through the shadows we've learned to live with. Healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives in fragments, through the strength to walk away, the courage to rebuild, and the grace to keep going, even when the road ahead is uncertain. Life has a way of stripping us bare, just before it dresses us in something better. Dear friend, there comes a moment, often quiet and unannounced, when a person realizes that survival was never the final destination, dignity was. Nora's story reminds us that the greatest triumph is not revenge, but the ability to reclaim our lives without bitterness. Like the Stoics taught, we can't always control what breaks us, but we can choose how we rise. What matters most isn't what was taken, but what we rebuild with what's left. And sometimes, light doesn't come crashing in. It arrives when we choose to open the door. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world, and helps us bring more stories like this to those who need them.